I mean, like, we are really, really close now, right? But basically, Total War Warhammer is us attempting to kind of bring to life the fantasy tabletop game, which has kind of affected generations of people. I mean, it's been around for years and years, and in my opinion, like, nobody's really done a good job of kind of bringing it into, like, kind of the world of video game. You had some wicked games in the past, but...
Like Shadow of the Horned Rat.
Shadow of the Horned Rat was amazing, Dark Omen was great, and we really want to kind of follow on with that and make something that's truly a really kind of culmination of the Warhammer series and the franchise. So you're going to be sitting there, it's still a Total War game at heart, right? So you've still got the kind of turn-based campaign map where you're managing regions, moving armies, constructing buildings, conquering provinces, but then you've also got a kind of excellent battle system, which really feeds more into the kind of Warhammer style of it. So, you know, you've got these armies marching across tables, as it were, kind of towards each other and fighting. You'll be seeing, you know, units from the Warhammer tabletop game. So if you love Warhammer already, you'll see lots of recognizable things that we brought in. But also, if you're not a fan of Warhammer and perhaps like strategy games or fantasy games, like, we're really planning to kind of try and bring you into this world and kind of make you start to love it as well.
So I think a lot of the question here, particularly if you come at this from a Total War angle, is what has it taken to get fantasy into that, as interesting in principle and practically, and sort of, I guess, what does that offer you as a game designer? Because you've worked on the Total War series extensively already, correct?
Like, yeah, I was on Attila, yeah.
Right, so for sure. So, like, what difference does it make that you have magic, that you have orcs, that you have, you know, the fantastic creatures and so on?
I mean, I think we said as marketing our rules have changed.
The rules have changed.
I know, but like, it kind of has to a certain extent. I mean, like, traditionally we have a very standard style of kind of military medieval combat. So you've got kind of infantry, cavalry, artillery, archers, etc., etc. But in order to bring a fantasy game to life, you don't have just those kind of fairly standard historical unit archetypes. You've got flyers, right? You've got dragons that are flying across the battlefield. You've got undead and zombies. You know, they fall into similar realms, but you're having to do it in a slightly different way. So, you know, you've got to really bring new sets of mechanics to manage it, as well as kind of magic as well. Like, you know, traditionally we've had ability systems and things like that where you're able to kind of help your army forwards, but this is taking it to a whole other level. I mean, you're casting direct damage, destructive spells on the enemy army. So, you know, it's been a real challenge for us to balance that, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want it so the whole battle is just the spells and these new units kind of water down too much the formula that we already have. So we kind of be trying really hard to kind of fit it in with our existing formula while bringing some new kind of ingredients to the recipe that is your combat experience.
Presumably, on the other hand, you don't want that stuff to be too subtle either. I mean, I'm not saying that just, you know, Tom, our web editor, was on earlier, having played the demo and lost all of his like dwarven helicopters to the moon, apparently. So that's, you know, no, it was his cannons, but nonetheless, so that's obviously a surprise. But I think when I was imagining you making this game, I was thinking there's a chance that some of those fantastic creatures will become sort of like elephants with hats on. You know what I mean? If we were transplanting from a Rome game, how have you, kind of, what strategic element have you made that makes sure that this stuff, like your giant spiders, aren't simply an equivalent to an earlier unit with a fantasy skin, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, one of the biggest changes, and it is quite a subtle one, is that they are on their own, right? Previously, a unit is always kind of multiple entities, and there were challenges, of course, with bringing that to life. But actually, a single entity unit, we've been able to really, bring out the character. Like, the art and the animation we've used in the game is absolutely astounding. It's really, really good. But also, we've been able to kind of look at this guy and say, what is a giant? We can start doing things like, he has extremely high damage output, and we've brought in things like AoE attacks and stuff to actually enable him to deal the kind of damage that you would expect a giant to deal, but also his size becomes a factor that you can utilize in gameplay, right? He's really tall. If you're firing arrows at him, he's a pretty big target. He's quite easy to hit. So we've kind of been able to fit him into the kind of, the part of the game, the kind of actual makeup of it, in a really nice way, while bringing a slightly new gameplay element to it, because you want to use him to break a line, right? You want to charge him into a unit of infantry and totally break them, using his big attacks, his kind of knockaways, picking people up, smacking them on the ground. Like, break that single unit, but then you want to make sure he doesn't then get mobbed and kind of swamped down, because that's where he loses his edge, as it were. He can just get surrounded and taken down from that point.
How much, obviously you've got to introduce these Warhammer universe units, not just visually but also mechanically, which we were discussing, but how much do you then have to kind of reflect how they work mechanically in the Warhammer game? You know, to what extent will a Warhammer player coming to Total War Warhammer be able to go, actually, I kind of know what this is for, I've played the tabletop game for 15 years, that kind of thing?
I mean, I think they're very much trying to take the spirit of the game.
Right.
So, like, I don't think we can really one-to-one map all of our kind of systems and things like that and bring them kind of to one-to-one parity. It's a turn-based versus a real-time game. So, you know, there are going to be things that we can't strictly do that way, but we've taken the kind of the theme and the feeling of what Warhammer is and used that to kind of approach our balancing, as well as I was saying with like the giant, for example. Like we kind of see what is a giant in the tabletop game? What is his purpose? How does he fit into an army? And how do we bring that to life in Total War? But importantly, kind of, we're not just targeting Warhammer players with this. We really want to make it accessible to all, as it were. Like we really want everyone to be able to pick this up, play it, and really enjoy it. So we kind of really want to introduce you to things slowly but surely. So we're unlocking the units kind of over time, as it were. So as you play through a campaign, you're kind of getting them in drips and drabs. So you're actually getting used to a unit before we approach you with others. We're doing long kind of introductory gameplay on the campaign where you sort of get taught all these things and get really brought into the world, right? Because there's a lot to see there, but also into the units and the mechanics that your faction's going to have, because every faction plays really, really differently from one another.
So this is not just, I mean, I suppose that's interesting what I was going to say, because this is not just fantasy, it's fiction, and that's very different to every other Total War game. Even, you know, this is not attempting to recreate history. You have a liberty not just to create sort of these sort of fantastic units, but to tell a story, which you wouldn't necessarily have had within history, right? Well, you can do certain things with historical battles and so on, but broadly speaking, a sort of a character-driven narrative is much harder if you're talking about ancient Rome or feudal Japan.
Yeah.
Like, how has that kind of influenced the way this game sort of works, both from a player perspective and as you coming at it as a developer?
I mean, like, my personal favourite thing about Total War is actually you make your own story.
Right.
So you've got your kind of overarching narrative that's kind of going on. It's kind of my faction that I'm playing as, what happens to me, how I play, but then also the characters within your faction. So, you know, they gain traits and abilities and things. They kind of all become their own little characters, as it were, which I really, really like. But in Warhammer, as you say, we've kind of got this really interesting lore and actual narrative that we can pluck from, right? So we kind of very early on, we decided we were going to look at a single part of that narrative. Like we're going to look at a single kind of era, as it were. So we don't really have a concept of years or time moving forward in that, which really lets us explore this kind of panorama, as it were, of what is actually going on in the world at the time. But also we have very much a sandbox game, right? So we do still want players to make their own stories. So the way we've generally approached that is we've kind of put lots and lots of lore and narrative and stuff into the world, but it's all player accessed. It's not something that we literally throw into your face unless we really feel it's strongly kind of advancing the narrative or it's an important date or something like that. But we actually let you experience it at your own pace, which is the quest battles, which is kind of one of my favourite features. So, you know, when you reach certain ranks on the campaign map, you unlock a quest, and at the end of the quest you get a character's magic item, which you've taken from the rulebooks themselves, but these quests are kind of, every mission on that quest gives you a bit more lore and a bit more narrative about that character themselves, as well as the kind of mindset of the faction and the race that you're actually playing with at that point.
Something that really stood out to me when I swung by to see the game earlier was, and this must affect you as a battle designer, is the environments are very different. The places where the battles take place feel extremely different to any other Total War game I've seen. The people who are here at the show are playing in like a sort of dwarven underground hall, which is an incredibly square environment, sort of like broken off with waterfalls and some sort of like fallen masonry and stuff. Does that change the way you go about designing battlefields for Total War? You're not on rolling hillsides anymore necessarily, right?
I mean, it's an interesting one because it almost started off more as a kind of art perspective. So we're doing the kind of Blackfire Pass map, and we thought, you know what, this is a fantasy world. This isn't just kind of flat plains everywhere. There's going to be some really almost over-the-top environments that you're looking at. So Blackfire Pass was really tall, and there were entrances to like dwarven mines and things like that around. Like, it was a really interesting environment because you kind of got locked in by it. You're almost in an arena at that point. And we thought, this is actually quite cool. So we then started looking, what effects is this going to have on gameplay, right? Because, you know, any change like that, you're affecting the way the game plays. So we started looking, we can actually change what we call the playable area, the area you actually fight your battle in, based on that. So the level we have here, Thundering Falls, is in the Dwarven Underway, so it's kind of subterranean. It's the ancient Dwarven pathways between their settlements. But once again, we were kind of these have to be long and thin. These have to feel claustrophobic, right? You can't have a big cave that's really open and wide. Yeah. So we went, let's make it claustrophobic. But then it also gave us some really interesting ideas. We've made lots of entry points and ingress areas onto that map, so reinforcements and things are able to come in and join the battle. And you know, when you're playing Thundering Falls, you'll see the enemies kind of are scripted to come on from the sides and things like that. So it really made us kind of think, you know, what happens when we change this area size? Does it have to be a square playable area? Can we play with different shapes and sizes? And the interesting thing it also brought is it kind of played into the dwarf faction quite heavily. I mean, they've got no cavalry, right? Every faction's so different. The dwarfs' main thing they haven't got is any form of fast-moving cavalry unit. They've got the gyrocopters, as you mentioned earlier, but on the whole, they're very slow, you know, lots of artillery pieces, you know, they need to kind of unlimber in order to fire, things like that. So you kind of got to play with that. So they're very good at getting flanked, right? And the Greenskins are very excellent at flanking because they've got mainly wolf riders and fast-moving units. So actually we found out by shrinking these areas in the dwarfen underway,
it suits the dwarves.
Suited the dwarf gameplay really, really well. So it worked nicely from a kind of thematic viewpoint as well as a gameplay.
So I guess that's sort of partly the storytelling you're talking about, right? You can sort of explain or imply why the dwarves are the way they are strategically using the fantasy environment that they created.
And all the dwarven mountain paths and stuff are their own environments. You'll see these amazing kind of mountain ranges and dwarven carracks. Carracks are like their entrances to their cities. They're kind of more fortresses than anything, but and you'll see all these kind of amazing things when you're playing in those regions. But as you say, like it will play into your hands as a dwarven player, so you can really be very defensive and very turtling, which is what a dwarf really should be at that point.
Turtling.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of the campaign map on the video, I think, and so it'd be great to. I know you're a battle designer first and foremost, but you've worked on campaign stuff before. As developers, has this felt like a steady evolution? Because I guess my perspective as a player is that the Total War campaign map has evolved over time and through the games and across eras. Is this a big evolution, big huge step in that, or is it a continual, a continual development of what process has been ongoing with Creative Assembly for a long time?
I mean, I think it's as much an evolution as it is a revolution. I mean, one of the main things we decided to do is we got loads of really strong mechanics that certainly Total War players are familiar with, but also most strategy players can probably quite easily comprehend from that. So kind of, we really sat there and went, what have we got? So rather than trying to invent lots and lots of brand new mechanics, let's see what mechanics we already have and which ones we can evolve and make into something different. So for example, previous Total War games we've had like missions. For example, once again this ties into the narrative a little bit. You've got your missions, so they kind of randomly pop up based on conditions in the world, and it's things like, go attack this faction or collect 5,000 gold, something, and you get a reward for that. So we thought, how do we take that with like the dwarves, for example? And we've just released a campaign gameplay demo, which is on YouTube at the moment. It's quite interesting to see some of the mechanics they have as a faction, but we thought, the dwarves have this thing called the Book of Grudges, right? So anytime anyone does something that wrongs them, such as spills their beer or kind of shaves their beard or something like that, they get quite angry and they write it down in blood in a book called the Damazkron, the Book of Grudges. And basically, the dwarves want to clear the Damazkron. They want to have kind of repaid and avenged all the grudges that they haven't. We went, let's turn that into a mechanic. Let's say you do have these missions to achieve. They're tied into how you win the game as the dwarves, but they're also something you've got to pay attention to. If you're not filling out the Damazkron, if you're not kind of righting the wrongs, as it were, you'll start getting penalties such as public order and things like that.
Right.
So we were able to take something that already exists to a certain extent, but really remold it and bring it in something new. And you'll be seeing these kind of things with every faction, right? Like every race in the game has their own campaign as well as battle mechanics that really differentiate them from one another.
So that, to clarify, that Book of Grudges, is that a dynamic based on being wronged in the course of the campaign, or is it something you guys have, almost forms a kind of scripted set of wrongs?
Yeah. It's definitely when you've been wronged. So the Greenskins, I was recently playing, and the Greenskins came and took one of my small settlements, some of my kind of little towns, as it were. They came and take it. The Book of Grudges popped up, and I was like, oh, not another one. I got to take this one up as well. So my mission was then, I've got to take back that settlement from the Greenskins, right? I've got to go and destroy them. Unfortunately, it was Grimgor Ironhide with a very large army, so I'm going to have to work towards that one, I think.
So you guys you're zooming ever closer to the release of this game. Like, I guess what kind of feedback have you managed to get so far? I mean, I imagine that hopefully this, I know you've been more doing the stage stuff at this event. You showed the game off to a lot of people yesterday. Like, what is the response you've gotten both from Warhammer fans and from people who've maybe come at this as the next Total War game? Yeah,
I mean, response so far has been really good, actually. Like, lots of people are saying it's fun. It's a really fun game because we've brought so many new things to it, like as we were saying earlier with the battle units, and certainly people who've seen the campaign map and we've chatted to about that, like, seem really interested in all the new things we brought and the way in which they all fit in with what Warhammer is as a franchise. Like, so much of it feels Warhammer, and we've had Warhammer fans come up and go, I'm buying this game, I don't care. You've taken one of my units that I've got painted at home and suddenly it's running around a battlefield. Like, people are loving that side of it, but also people are really loving the gameplay concepts that are coming out of that. And kind of from a feedback point of view, it's been great to get feedback at events. We started having gameplay quite early on, actually. We had people playing the game at a very early stage. We got lots of internal things where we're playing the game internally and generating feedback and working through that, because we are pretty much at the kind of polish balancing phase now, right? Like, this is the point where we're trying to kind of really tighten the screws and actually make it a kind of tight, fun experience for veterans and new players alike.
So it's notable at this event, almost coincidentally, that there's so much Warhammer here.
There's a lot of Warhammer.
and Warhammer is sort of dispersed into the gaming world, and it's having a big resurgence. You know, we spoke to the Eternal Crusade guys, which is a Warhammer 40,000 multiplayer shooter yesterday. Speaking to you now, we have Dawn of War, which admittedly is an older game, but is continuously being updated. They're coming on later today. Like, is it interesting occupying a space that's so many different developers at different levels of the industry, and so many different approaches to a license that you now have to share with them? What's it like, kind of seeing all that stuff being done around the thing you're doing?
For me personally, I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Like, as I was saying earlier with games like Shadow the Horned Rat, and then you've had Vermintide and stuff coming out fairly recently. Like, everyone's kind of telling a slightly different story, right? Everyone's taken that core lore and been able to tell their story from it and make the game that's sort of letting players experience their story of it. And I find it quite interesting to see that side of it. Like, as you were saying, kind of Dawn of War and kind of the new third-person shooter, like, they're quite different games. They've got a really different feel in the kind of texture of them and the way that they actually play out. And I think it's quite fun to see everyone having a go at telling that story as well.
I mean, and also I guess you're working with a community in the Warhammer community who are enormously passionate about that specific thing. And I wonder do you feel like I wonder if you wouldn't necessarily face the same scrutiny even from people who really like history, right? People who really like history, but history is pretty much, I don't know how many fans there are of ancient Rome who might feel if you don't get the Gladius quite right, they'll know. Like, I mean, you're entering a new world of working with fandom here, I guess. Does that sort of change your relationship with that community at all? Change the way you think about how you're developing the game?
I mean, like, luckily in the studio we've got a lot of people who are also really big Warhammer fans, right? You know, Warhammer's a game we're going to be supporting for years and years now. Like, you know, we've got expansions. You know, we're going to be developing more and more races, expanding our campaign map. You know, there's loads going to be going on with this. So we've got loads of people in the studio who are massive Warhammer fans, right? So that's been a really good starting point for us, right? But also with regards to history, as you were saying, like, history is kind of malleable to a certain extent. It's written by the victors, as it were. There's lots of kind of differentiating accounts over kind of most parts of it. So, you know, there's a lot of kind of subjectivity going around it. But with a lore such as Warhammer, you do have to kind of be on point with it, on the ball with it. And we have really tried to kind of keep as close to the original literature as we really can, because it's something that people love, right? Like, if somebody really loves something, you don't want to go in and start kind of messing around with it too much.
We don't mess with their orcs.
No, don't mess with the orcs.
Thank you so much for joining us and for showing us the game. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show, and I believe you're showing off the game again later this afternoon downstairs. Are you going to be trying, I know you did this yesterday, getting the audience to direct the battle for you?
Yes, it was really successful yesterday.
You say that. Is that true?
No.
Okay.
The first order was to retreat.
Okay.
And from that point on, it all went slightly downward spiral.
As it would. Were they deliberately attempting to undermine you think?
No, I think it was an honest tactical
Okay,
but we're going to try it again today because it was actually quite a bit of fun.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining me.